Well, for more on the fallout of the US exiting the Paris climate deal, let's bring in Jigar Shah, CEO of Generate Capital. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Donald Trump's decision to pull the country out of the Paris Accord came just days before World Environment Day. What's the fallout been from this on the global stage?
Well, it's very interesting to see. The biggest problem with climate change for a long time is that there really was no villain. We're always looking for someone to demonize, and I think Donald Trump has given us such a person.
Now, in terms of the economic concerns, what are the biggest issues that this raises with Trump pulling the US out of the Paris Agreement?
Well, it's really more about activating the base and really getting folks to deploy. I mean, the reason why India, China, and many others signed the Paris Accord is because today wind and solar are cheaper than new coal, whether it's in India, China, or in the United States or in Canada. And so now I think, the real question is how fast do we shut down existing coal plants and how fast do we replace them with clean energy sources?
And the US certainly taking a very divergent path to China, also one of the world's biggest carbon emitters. So how does Trump's move now change China's role on climate change?
Well, China has clearly sensed that there's a void on the world stage, and they've stepped into that void. I mean, China already is one of the largest manufacturers in the world of wind and is the largest manufacturer of solar panels. It's starting to become one of the largest manufacturers of electric vehicles as well. And so it has a lot of product to export around the world, a lot of climate solutions that it wants to promote.
Now, despite what Trump did by pulling the US out, you also have the private sector, state and city officials saying they're going to have their own levels that they're going to try and meet in line with the Paris Climate Accord. Is that enough to meet the original goals that the US agreed to?
It is. In fact, President Obama's commitments to Paris were basically just a rubber stamp of the state mandates. And so we're already on track to reaching the US's full Paris agreement targets within the next few years. And so I don't think it was really about the targets. I think the states and the cities have been leading, and there's much more that they could do that's cost effective today. It's really more about abdicating the US's role on the global stage, which, I think is hurting folks the most.
Now, if the government does plan to invest more in coal energy, where does this leave the future then of America's clean energy industry?
Well, I think it's, as many things that Donald Trump says, it's really empty rhetoric. Figuring out how to save the coal industry is very difficult to do in the U.S. because the coal industry really is just not economic. It's not economic versus wind and solar, but it's also not economic versus natural gas today. And so there's really nothing he can do unless he's willing to drain the U.S. Treasury of billions and billions of dollars and subsidize U.S. coal.
Now, having fulfilled this campaign promise for his supporters, for his base, and now in the face of this reversal, is there room for any sort of middle ground or anything to be negotiated at this point?
No, that's the beauty of it, right? Is now that Donald Trump has put himself forward as the villain of the world, you start to see Jerry Brown, who was frankly taking half measures just 2 years ago, coming out with a full-throated support of decarbonizing California. The same thing's true with the governor of Massachusetts, the governor of Illinois. There are many of these states that were doing half-hearted measures who are now saying, we really do need to step up and lead. Our rhetoric is not enough. We have to pass legislation and move billions of dollars of capital into climate solutions. And so that's now happening at scale. And for that, I think we can thank Donald Trump.
Now, global consensus on climate change was an environmental, diplomatic, and economic effort. So how does Trump's decision affect America's ability to really have a seat at the table on future discussions?
Well, obviously, that's the talking point that most folks are focused on. But to remember, George Bush pulled us out of the Kyoto Protocol as well, back in 2000. And so it's not something the U.S. is doing for the first time. And I think that the U.S. really does feature most of the technology necessary to integrate a lot of this new clean energy paradigm into the world stage. And so my sense is that U.S. companies and U.S. cities and states will still play that very crucial diplomatic role around the world.
So perhaps President Trump's actions may end up being moot. Well, thank you so much, Jigar Shah, CEO of Generate Capital.